and welcome to the Building Power for Black and Brown. We know it's working now because the recording has started, but welcome everyone to the Building Power for Black and Brown Excluded Workers. The two organizations here today are Jobs to Move America and the National Black Worker Center, and we both are going to talk about work that we are leading in the South that will be uniting, and we believe is extremely important for building power with Black and Brown workers. I'm going to kick us off with talking about what the National Black Worker Center is doing. The National Black Worker Center is a network of 12 Black worker centers across the country, and our purpose is to build, in addition to building power, is to end racism and discrimination in the workplace, specifically for Black workers. We work specifically with Black workers because we believe and know that when we solve for the worker crisis for Black workers, we solve for every crisis that all workers are dealing with. Racism and discrimination doesn't stop or begin with the Black community. The way that power works is it finds, if it's successful in one community, then it goes to other communities, be that Latinx, immigrant communities, et cetera. And so that's why we at the National Black Worker Center draw the line in the sand to ensure that those forces that seek to disempower, to rob, to steal, to exploit workers, that we are ending that battle. So one of the things that we want to start off at the National Black Worker Center sharing is about a campaign that we are launching in the meatpacking industry. And this campaign, we selected the meatpacking industry because of a couple of reasons. One, because of its history within the Black and Brown community in terms of jobs, the health and safety issues that are there, the COVID crisis that was uplifted with the pandemic in terms of worker safety, the number of temporary workers that are there, and the number of workers in the meatpacking industry that are formerly incarcerated. And if I could start off with anything, it would be to say that it's this collision, right, of atrocity that happens within this industry that rose it to the level of prioritization within our organization. The history of the meatpacking industry closely traces the history of corporate power and the consolidation of power in the United States. When we look back into as far as 1906, you can look at the U.S. Upton Sinclair's famous expose, The Jungle, which revealed these horrific conditions of the Chicago meatpacking plants at the turn of last century. And it really laid blame on the consolidation of power of the packing companies. The novel also helped to catalyze the changes that we saw in the industry, including the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Food and Drug Act, which led to the creation of the Food and Drug Administration as we know it today. But in the same period, antitrust laws aimed at the stranglehold of big business in all sectors broke up most of the powerful players in this meat cartel, if you will. The other thing that happened during this time was that we saw large-scale unionizing along with the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, which improved wages and working conditions at meatpacking plants. And so by the middle of the 20th century, meatpacking jobs were considered skilled labor, and workers could expect to rise to the middle class. And this might be kind of mind-blowing for people today, because when you think about the work that's done in meat processing plants, you certainly don't think of it as being skilled labor or even a pathway to middle-class employment. This period, unfortunately, didn't last long, and that's why we see it, this industry as it exists today. As companies began to move the packing facilities out of cities into rural areas to be supposedly closer to the animal stock, they also were able to have more control over their workers. This transition to a production line where workers performed the same task repeatedly meant unskilled workers could be hired at lower wages. And consolidation began to rise again, such that today meatpacking is one of the most concentrated sectors of the economy, with consolidation conditions at plants have worsened severely. My cat is pushing my screen, excuse me, y'all. So, and I wanted to talk about what's happening today in meatpacking, and or more recently in meatpacking. In September of 2022, the U.S. Department of Labor issued its first citation against 2 meatpacking plants for failing to protect employees from exposure to the coronavirus. At those plants alone, almost 1,500 workers have been infected and at least 12 died. But the fines had only totaled $29,000. That amount was pennies, right? And just too lenient for what was going on, the atrocities that we were seeing. This meager penalty underscored the fact that during the first 6 months of the pandemic, in no community had the foundational inequities in the United States society become more visible than among poultry and meatpacking workers. If you remember, during that period of time, the meatpacking industry was one of those industries where at that time, the former President Trump said that they had to keep working. These essential workers were provided with little to no protections. These most meatpacking workers are the most impacted group of workers in the United States. But under the current federal health and safety enforcement regime, they are also the least protected. Some of the things that we saw happening during that time was Tyson Chicken management taking bets on how many of their workers would become ill with the coronavirus or become infected with of the coronavirus. I believe that the meatpacking industry is one of the most dangerous and exploitative industries in the country. The slaughter and processing of the meat that we eat, a lot of us, relies heavily upon rural workers who are disproportionately immigrants, refugees, and people of color who don't have better options. And so I wanted to share with you just some characteristics of who these workers are that work within the food processing industry. So we know that for example, female workers make up 47.4% of all workers in the country. They also make up 36.2% of all workers in the processing plants. Black workers only comprise of 11.3% of workers in this country, but they represent 21.9% of the workers in animal slaughtering and processing plants. Latinx workers make up 16.8% of all workers, and yet they represent 34.9% of all workers in animal and slaughtering processing plants. And I think you can see a trend here. Those members of our community who have been historically exploited are also representative of the largest populations of individuals within this particular industry, to include naturalized citizens and non-citizens. Non-citizens represent 50.4% of all workers in this country, and yet they represent 70.9% of all workers in these plants. The next thing that we would want to share is what the minimum wage and salary income looks like for these workers. Outside of this industry, the minimum wage and salary is just over almost $36,000 a year, $35,989. But within this industry, it's $30,485. And so what that amounts to is that 8.8% of the employees that work within this industry do so holding full-time jobs below the poverty line. And so when I started, I talked about like why we were at the Black Workers Center interested in this. And The other issue was that we wanted to address our temp workers. Black workers and Latinx workers are also overrepresented in staffing agency work. Black workers at temp, Black workers doing temp work are about nationally 12.2% of the overall workforce, but they make up 23.2% of temporary help and staffing agencies. They also are found mainly in manufacturing and warehouse occupations. The same would be true for Latinx workers, right? Again, they make up 19.3% of the workhouse, but they in manufacturing and warehouses, they represent 30.9% of temp workers in those occupations. And so what we are seeing is a concentration of jobs that seek to disenfranchise people, jobs that seek to or result in low wages, unsafe conditions, and a moving, if you will, or ushering in people of color, Black and brown workers, into jobs that basically go nowhere. So the next thing I think that I would want to share is what we know about temp workers and why this is such a particular issue for the National Black Worker Center. So there was a study that was done by Temp Worker Justice, the Chicago Workers Collaborative, NELP, New Labor, the Justice Center, the Mississippi Worker Center, who is part of the National Black Worker Centers Network, and the Warehouse Workers for Justice Alliance. And these are the things that they found in their report in a study that they conducted from 2019 to 2021. During the study, they spoke to over 1,300 temporary workers in 47 states that were empowered by staffing agencies like Kelly Services, Manpower, and that worked for employers that included Amazon, Walmart, Google, and Tyson's Food, as I mentioned earlier. The key findings were that these are the issues of temp workers: wage theft, perma-temping, safety training, employer retaliation. In terms of wage theft, 1 of every 4 workers, which was 24% of the group that they surveyed, reported that their employers had stolen wages from them in 1 of 3 ways. They either failed to pay them the minimum wage, their overtime rate, or for all of the work that the hours that they had worked. The perma-temping really speaks to the fact that people had been working in their current temp assignment for more than 1 year, often with the hopes of having a permanent position that never materialized. The safety training speaks to the fact that nearly 1 in 5, or 19% of these workers, never received any safety training. And when you go back to thinking about the meat processing industry, people are working on assembly lines that are going extremely fast, which heightens the amount of injuries that they experience. And then lastly, employer retaliation, in that 71% of temp workers said that they experienced some sort of retaliation for raising workplace issues with the supervisor or with their managers. And so it's because of these issues and the impact that this industry has on our community that the National Black Worker Center has launched a campaign in North Carolina, that where we've identified 12 meatpacking industries that we want to work with the workers there to bring them power and justice. And I'm going to pass it over to our organizer, Isaiah Withers, who'll talk more about that work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tanya. And again, my name is Isaiah Withers, community organizer with the National Black Worker Center. And I just want to hop off of what Tanya was just recently speaking about with temp workers in these agencies. If you can, Angela, go to our next slide, please. And this covers what we were just discussing on the war on the meatpacking industry. If you can go to our next slide, please, Angela. So life as a temp worker. In the right-hand corner, right before I joined on with the National Black Worker Center, I was a temp worker for ground maintenance at Duke University. And upon even just starting the job, I discovered it through Indeed as a lane to get in at Duke University. It was promoted as we're looking for ground maintenance workers, landscaping at Duke University. There was no indication that it was through a temp agency. The temp agency that I worked with was Grace Federal Solutions here in Durham, North Carolina. And as I got in for like the orientation, it was a room full of Black folks, a few Latinx workers, and the main focus was how we can fill in the holes and the gaps of what was needed for Duke University. Off the rip, my week-to-week work schedule was inconsistent, as I have bullet right here, where 1 week I might be working Monday through Friday. The next week I might work Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday at a different position. So it was always musical chairs with where I would have my assignment at. So it was always an assignment relocation. I originally signed up and put down for grounds maintenance. On a Wednesday, I could end up working in the cafeteria or working in housekeeping. The work that me and my colleague were doing at the time when we joined was right under management. So we were doing a lot of the heavy lifting labor that was right down the lane of injuries and prone to injuries. Several times we would go in with wrist braces on, and this is just our third week working there, and back braces to be able to maintain and sustain the working conditions that they had us working at Duke University under the eyes of the manager. The same thing that was pushed to us within those 5 to 6 months was, if you keep working hard, there will be an opportunity for you to advance and be able to get a full-time job. But you must keep working hard and you must keep applying yourself. Within like the third month, the 2 colleagues that I joined in with were already moved to like different locations on the campus and to other working positions. It was never a consistent basis. As life as a temp worker, just kind of adding a little bit more fuel as well to what Tanya was mentioning of what occurs on the ground on a day-to-day basis at temp agencies and then working through temp agencies. And I'll go to the next one, Angela. So what we're launching is our Black initiative, which will be in partnership with Inland Litigation. And what Black stands for is Black Legal Action Community Knowledge. And we will be providing legal support to fight back against a lot of these racist tactics and manipulations that are happening in these temp agencies and also in our meatpacking and poultry plants. A lot of these anti-racist practices that go on. We want to also, through with Black, be able to launch with this campaign with meatpacking. Our meatpacking campaign is our Know Your Rights training, which will be made up of 3 to 4 within 4 locations during our discovery and our outreach period of going to each plant, being able to come back to the communities and build a bridge with the community and our Black workers around what it is that we should know in the workplace. What are some of our rights as a temp worker? What are some of our rights as a Black worker within this workplace where they're constantly giving us low wages and we're working in a pool of issues and OSHA violations? And that's why, so, I wanted to add it just right after that slide, because I wish at the time that we have known a little bit more about our rights and ways we were being taken advantage of while we were working at Duke University as a temp worker. And Angela, I'll go to the next slide, please. So as Tanya mentioned, 2020 came rolling around. COVID-19 rates were out of this world. And the 11 to 12 plants that we're focusing in on had the highest cases of COVID-19. This was something that we were able to pull from a firm researching.
For a moment, could you stop for a second, or is this live?
This is the next set of.
that we were able to,
The next workshop.
Okay.
I think somebody's off mute. And this is what we were able to pull from the firm research of all of these plants in these rural areas that were having COVID-19 outbreaks. What we were looking at it as was was simply just like the rattler to the snake of other plethora of issues that were happening and OSHA violations from these plants. So COVID just really exacerbated it and pushed it more to the forefront, which not only affected our Black workers within the plant, but these rural small cities and the community at large. And I'll go to the next one. Thank you, Angela. So the plants that we're looking at and that we have identified that had these highest cases of COVID-19, also several complaints and OSHA violations, is Smithfield in Tar Heel, North Carolina, Mountaineer in Siler City, Mountaineer in Lumber Ridge, Butterball in Mount Olive, Pilgrim's Pride in Sanford, Sanderson's Farms in Kinston, Sanderson Farms in St. Paul's, Prestige Farms in St. Paul's, Smithfield in Clinton, and then Smithfield in Wilson. So as we dug a little bit deeper and looked, also with these OSHA violations that were happening, but also looking in deeper to the past of some of these poultry and meatpacking plants. For example, one of our tier plants that we were looking at is Mountaineer Farms in Lumber Ridge, whereas it says on here in February the 25th, 2022, announced that it's fining Mountaineer Farms and Lumber Ridge $21,000 for failing to provide employees with effective information and training against hazardous chemicals and having them wear eyewear and protective equipment. Added on to that, we're able to find several complaints that come from a lot of these plants in these rural small cities here in North Carolina. As stated here in 2007, with one case with Carrie Nielsen, a Black worker, unjustifiably negative performance evaluation in retaliation for 2 complaints that she had made regarding race discrimination at Lumber Ridge. So these locations have not only been pulled from with several discriminations that are happening and complaints being made at these meatpacking and poultry plants, but also throw in the mix with previous hazardous conditions preceding COVID-19, added on to COVID-19 as well, making it a harsh and dangerous working environment for Black workers in these plants. And I'll go to the next slide, Angela. So connecting the dots, as I mentioned before, Black is Black legal action community knowledge. It's nothing without our community going hands in hand as we're doing this work. So as you see here in the left and the lower right corner is some of our top tier locations. In the left corner is Kinston's Progressive Black City Council Board, where we'll be working in Kinston at Sanderson Farms, the poultry plant out there, and working in partnership. Down here in the right corner is one of our previous partners at Fair Promise AME Church in Sanford, North Carolina for Pilgrim's Pride, which is another one of our poultry and meatpacking plants that we'll be working hands in hands with as we're doing this work and launching our Black initiative with Inland to build the bridge with the community, to make sure that not only with our Black workers, we're bringing these Know Your Rights trainings and also this legal support, but with our community at large, because if it affects one of us in the workplace, it affects the full community. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our goals will be launching Black again with our Know Your Rights trainings that will be happening throughout the duration of this full campaign. Also in our summer, as we're kicking off this campaign next month, we'll be kicking it off with our PPE van, Power Protection and Empowerment van, which will be loaded with, masks, N95 masks, COVID-19 testing, food, and equipment for our Black workers here at these plants, as we're also engaging in one-on-one conversations just to find out what are some of the issues that are happening in the first place at these plants, to get more insight of what's going on, how we can be of support, and which one of these plants we'll be able to return to as well, to be able to hold some of these Know Your Rights trainings for our Black workers at these plants. And that is our sources right here for our slides. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. I'm gonna start to share our screen to do our the part of our PowerPoint. Give me just a second. Hold on just a second. Okay, I think I got it. Share my screen. Okay. Sorry about the wait. Good afternoon. My name is Angela Dawson, and Patricia Todd and I work with Jobs to Move America. I'll first start off talking about just what who we are and the organization that we work for. We are a manufacturer. We're a national strategic policy nonprofit. We work in manufacturing communities, especially in communities that work in transportation and infrastructure. And the way we work is we would like to change the way people think about how we do public spending. If there's almost $2 trillion a year spent on infrastructure and services annually, we would like to see that money being reprioritized so that we are training people to live in the community, so we can up the chances that people that work in these plants will actually live in the same community, and also ensure that the company is trying to ensure that people who are historically disadvantaged are given a clear, a level playing field so that everyone can succeed, and by making sure that they have the training and the chance for apprenticeships and things like that. And the way we do that is we work with community members and the people that work in the plants to get community benefits agreements, and also get them to promise for union neutrality. In the last couple of decades, there have been quite a few international manufacturing companies coming to the South. They are doing that because here we have bigger incentives. I know, like in the state of Mississippi, we've given several $1 billion away to companies like Nissan and Toyota and Continental. Also, we are, a lot of the states here are right to work. Mississippi is a little bit more, it's a little bit different. They're at will, which means that a person can be fired for any non-discriminatory, we'll wait to roll our eyes, reason to fire anyone, so that so there's no accountability for why things are being done. And also their lower cost of living, and the union membership here is extremely low. And so this is very attractive for companies to come to the South. One of the other things that JMA is working towards is to making sure that if these jobs do come South, we do want jobs to come here, because most of the states in the South, Mississippi particularly, are below the poverty level. They're very, very high levels of poverty here. And we want to make sure that people want to work here in the South. One of the examples I can give is that any manufacturing company can get up on Monday and say, you know what, I'm going to fire 500 people that work in this state, in this factory. And there'll be 1,500 more people standing outside trying to get that 500 that were just opened. A lot of people here work in offshore oil rigs. So it's really hard to get any type of any type of green legislation passed, because people automatically think that, they're trying to take our jobs away if we're not working on these oil rigs. And we want to educate the community that there can be good green jobs in the South as well. Also, we're giving away money left and right for companies to come, and we're not doing things like taking care of our citizens in these states. We're not fully funding education in these states. So it's like a revolving door of workers that are just, ripe for the picking to be taken advantage of. And that's what we're trying to change here with JMA. And now I will turn it over to Patricia so she can discuss what community benefit agreements can do.
Thank you, Angela. I'm Patricia Todd. I'm the Southern Policy Manager for JMA based in Birmingham. Community benefits agreements have been around for a while in public-private partnerships, like if they're going to build a stadium or a public housing community. A lot of times a developer will be approached to negotiate a community benefits agreement with the neighborhoods surrounding the development. We've sort of taken that into the private sector. So we try to encourage manufacturers who receive either economic tax incentives or sell their product to a public agency, require them to negotiate a community benefits agreement. We just did the first one in Alabama with New Flyer, an electric bus company in Anniston. It was a 3-year campaign. We just signed the community benefits agreement with them. It is legally enforceable. It's not an MOU or a handshake. It's actually a contract. And it includes like they have to remain neutral if workers decide they want to form a union. It has targeted worker recruitment. So as they have job openings and are bringing people in, percentage of those have to be people of color, women, or system impacted people. We're putting together a pre-apprenticeship program with them so that people who want to come work for New Flyer know how to read blueprints, know how to, perform assembly, may be trained as a welder, a painter, or something like that. So we're doing that. And we also won in the CBA here that we can go into the plant twice a year and offer debt clinics for workers, which we know a lot of these workers, have court debt or, credit card debt. So we are working with nonprofit agencies to come in and provide those services, as well as providing worker rights training in the plant for workers. We also negotiated that they will give us a large bulletin board in the plant where we can post anything that we want to, as long as it's not profanity. So we'll take advantage of that. And they agreed to recognize heritage days, Women's History Month, Black History Month, those sort of things. So it really is historic, and it's the first one in Alabama. We're in the process of implementation. And what it does, it sort of levels the playing field for workers and communities. We work with the communities around that plant to provide services or serve on a quarterly meeting with New Flyer. So it's going to be very beneficial. Next. So we have been doing worker rights training via Zoom once a month. We had a grant from AFL-CIO to do this. And what we do is we educate Alabamians in targeted manufacturing communities about their rights in the workplace. This includes safety training, COVID training, pay and wage, how to report if you feel like you've been discriminated against. And it really does build worker power, and we will get a lot more people engaged as we're able to go into New Flyer and do these in person. Next. So some of the things to consider is we look at the manufacturers who've moved into Alabama, and I served 12 years in the legislature on the Education Budget Committee, where I've learned that there's little or no transparency in these economic tax incentives that are given. So, I'm the lobbyist for JMA here, so we'll be introducing some legislation that will increase transparency and accountability. But the things we look at is the density around the plant, the race, poverty numbers, union, let's all face it. Most of the companies that have moved into Alabama and Mississippi are manufacturing agencies, and they do not pay a living wage, and they can be very dangerous places for people to work. So next. So why this works matters. This is a little bit different tactic. What we do is we build a base of citizens who are interested in improving the conditions of their workplace and putting them on a path to activism and advocacy. And we worked on the Amazon campaign, and the National Black Workers Center actually came and put boots on the ground to help us with that. And what we did was we did not have that working relationship with workers. The labor union did, but what we did is organize the community around the plant to support the organizing effort. So we sent teams of people to gas stations and businesses and talked to them and left them materials where they could express their support for the workers being able to unionize. That gives the workers a feeling of protection. So it's a little bit different way of organizing workers that's really never been done before. We must redefine the Southern worker narrative as we move into the green economy. And that includes that, good jobs that are good paying, safe, competitive with other states, pro-union, and includes a path to leadership for all. I don't know if that's the last slide or not. Okay. So we're willing to answer, I know we've pushed through a lot of information in a short period of time, but we wanted to leave time for questions, answer questions and discussion and input. So maybe you could raise your hand if you have a question or comment. We must have done a really good job.
I know, right? Okay, we have a question from Ernesto Archila. If you could unmute and ask. I hope I said your name right.
Sure. Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you so much for these presentations. Just really, really interesting to see and hear. I was really curious, Patricia, on the last point, sort of how you all are sort of gauging living wages, sort of what the floor wages that you require in those community agreements, and kind of how that's calculated, and how you're thinking about that issue. Because as we know, like, $15 is not a living wage in most of the country, and yet most workers can't, don't even have access to that. And so how are you thinking through those issues? Be very curious.
Well, let me just say this. I think that, in Alabama, we don't have the minimum wage is a federal minimum wage. And many people, like a New Flyer, for example, got hired on at $13 an hour. Many of the other manufacturers pay anywhere from $13 to $17 an hour. And it's not stated in this community benefits agreement because CWA, who's the labor union that's going to come in and try to organize, that's what they're going to be working on, is the actual entry level pay. We're doing some research on how to communicate this to policymakers and stakeholders about the difference between, a living wage, and, that's going to take us some time because in Alabama, like the city of Birmingham tried to raise the minimum wage, and the legislature came in and preempted them from doing that. So, it's an ongoing conversation. There are many tools out there. You all have done work around this too. And, we have a lot of opposition to union organizing in Alabama. And, we're trying to sort of stay below the radar a little bit right now, because they have more money and people and resources than we do. But that's a great question. And the economic incentives in Alabama, if they do have a wage floor, it's $10 an hour. It's pathetic.
Thank you.
I would also like to add that in having that living wage conversation in the South, because the cost of living is significantly lower than anywhere else in the country, I think that's just another tool that is being used to kind of pit people against each other, where it's like, okay, you're not making $7.25, so why are you complaining? And if you leave, like here in the chicken plants, like Tyson is here in Carthage, Mississippi, they start people off making between $10 to $12 an hour, and then you got Nissan down the road or Continental down the road that's paying, starting people off at like $20 an hour. And so the problem that comes out of that is I'm making $20 an hour. So the companies can pretty much do anything they want, and I will still show up to work every day to take that mistreatment. And so, no, I won't vote for a union. I don't want to hear anything that has anything to do with that might make them, pull up stakes and leave. And so getting that information out that some places they can't leave because you made these promises that you would stay here for so long if we give you, so many billions of dollars in tax incentives, but people don't know that. And so, like I said, that creates a whole nother problem with trying to get people to, to see that it's not right, even though you're making a little more money. You don't know what time you're getting off work every day. You don't know if your kids are going to be picked up, all of these things that happen. And like one of the things with COVID as well, a lot of places, they weren't given proper PPE either, but they did not complain about it because they don't want to lose their job.
Yeah, and we know in the Amazon campaign, many people were fired that were involved in the organizing of the union, and we still don't have those results from that election yet. It's that close. Are there other questions? Well, I appreciate your all's time and choosing this workshop to come to. I think it's great that we're all looking at different strategies on how to empower workers, and especially those at the low end of the pay scale and people of color and system impacted people. And it's going to take all of us working together to make that happen. So thank everybody from coming, and you can probably, we're at Jobs to Move America. You can go to our website and find our email addresses if you all have any questions. Same for the other participants. Yeah, Angela.
Laurel Tompkins wants to know that she's glad to know that we're pushing transparency in Alabama around incentives, and are any other states doing this. I know Patricia is always saying that Mississippi is so open and so, about what they're doing. And I'm like, no, it's not because they're all honest. It's because they just don't give a damn what they do and who knows it. They just put it out there. So
Yeah, it's
That's what
really,
we're dealing with.
it's interesting. I started looking at Mississippi. They list every company that gets an economic tax incentive, how much they got and how many jobs they promised and where they are in completing that job requirement. In Alabama, these agreements are exempt from the Open Records Act. So we have no idea what's in the agreement. And they do a tax expenditure report every year, but it's cumulative. So we don't know how much they gave Amazon, how much they gave Mercedes. You know, none of that is public information. And that's what we're trying to change.
I guess that's it, guys. Thank you all for giving us the opportunity to do this. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. You
And
can keep in touch with the National Black Workers Center by following our social media at NBWC, and our website is National Black Workers Center.
all right.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.
You too.